Last night, just before we went on the air, the New York Times published a scoop, some interesting news in the form of an op-ed, which is an unusual way to break news. But this op-ed was by the founders of the research firm called Fusion GPS. That's the firm that hired former British spy Christopher Steele in 2016 to look into Donald Trump's Russia connection. Steele produced the now very famous dossier of detailed allegations about the Russian government intervening in the election to help Trump win. Fusion GPS paid Christopher Steele for that work. Fusion has since been attacked by the White House and by Republicans for their role in producing the dossier, but Fusion says they stand by their work. They say the attacks on them are an effort to divert attention from the damning stuff that they were able to turn up about Trump and Russia. Now, Fusion's founder, Glenn Simpson, has testified about the dossier and about his firm's work. And he's testified for more than 20 hours before 3 different congressional committees, all behind closed doors. Glenn Simpson and Fusion are now calling on those committees to release the transcripts of his testimony so the American people can judge for themselves as Republicans continue to attack that firm and the dossier. Well, today, the chairman of the first committee where Glenn Simpson testified, the Judiciary and the Committee in the Senate, he gave his response. And it doesn't make that much sense. Chuck Grassley is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Back in August, he said in Iowa that he would support releasing the transcript of Glenn Simpson's testimony. That's what he said in August. Today, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley said, no, he doesn't support that anymore, citing, quote, investigative factors that he must consider to temporarily protect certain information in the midst of an ongoing inquiry such as this one, like tainting the memory of other witnesses. More importantly, Senator Grassley provided Fusion GPS an opportunity for transparency 6 months ago when he invited the firm to publicly testify at an open committee hearing. Glenn Simpson of Fusion GPS declined. The committee's invitation for Mr. Simpson to testify at a public hearing remains on the table. So those are the 2 arguments, both from Grassley, in the same statement. It would taint the investigation for anybody in the public to know what you have told us. Also, you should have said it publicly. Those are 2 very contradictory ideas, right? You can't say that, and you should have just said that. Well, tonight, the top Democrat on that committee, Dianne Feinstein, her office tells us for the first time that she does support releasing the 10-hour transcript of Glenn Simpson's testimony. Senator Amy Klobuchar is on the committee, too. Her office also tells us tonight that she, too, supports releasing the transcript of Glenn Simpson's 10 hours of testimony. So a couple questions. Question 1, why isn't this transcript being released? Question 2, if Senator Grassley is going to stick to his U-turn on this, and the Republicans really aren't going to let this transcript out, could Fusion tell us more about their testimony on their own without the transcript being released? In their op-ed last night, for instance, I told you they broke some news. Part of the news they broke is that Fusion allowed all readers of the New York Times to know that one of the things they testified to was their belief that congressional investigators should look into the bank records of Deutsche Bank and other funders that supported Trump's businesses. They also told congressional investigators that they should consider looking into red flags for money laundering at numerous Trump properties. They suggested that the congressional committees heard that testimony but showed little interest in pursuing those matters. Plenty of other people have interest in that stuff, though. If the Republicans won't let this testimony out in the form of transcripts of the testimony, could we get it by some other means? Couldn't Fusion just describe to us what they testified to? Could other members of the committee who want that information released, could they just tell us what was said? Joining us now is Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. He sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which heard 10 hours of testimony from Glenn Simpson back in August. When we contacted all the members of the committee back then, Senator Blumenthal was the only Democrat at that time to publicly support releasing that Simpson transcript. Senator, it's really good to see you tonight. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Rachel.
So as I mentioned there, you, from the very beginning, said that this transcript should be out there. Senator Feinstein, who's the top Democrat on your committee, as of tonight, she tells us she now supports releasing that transcript as well. Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota also tells us she supports releasing that transcript. We had previously reported that Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah had said that he was in support of releasing it. Senator Chuck Grassley had told constituents on tape in Iowa that he would probably vote for releasing that transcript. What's going on now in terms of it not being released?
There is no question, Rachel, that this transcript or the summary of the interview should be released, and so should the transcript of the interview with Donald Trump Jr. and other witnesses who have come before the committee. What's going on now seems to be part of an effort to distract from the underlying investigation of collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign in their interference in our election and possible obstruction of justice. And it is unconscionable that we do not issue subpoenas for Donald Trump Jr. and others who have relevant knowledge about the potential collusion and obstruction of justice.
Senator Grassley is newly making this argument that releasing this information, releasing the transcript of these 10 hours of testimony, might interfere with ongoing investigations because they might interfere with other witnesses' recollections of events. That seems to be not an irrational argument for why some testimony might be kept private and out of public hands while an investigation is ongoing. I mentioned that this is a new argument for Senator Grassley. He didn't seem to be bothered by this before, and this didn't seem to preclude other Republican committees from releasing transcripts of testimony from Eric Prince or from Carter Page. How do you weigh that as a concern?
I've read that interview and closely reviewed it. And I've also, by the way, read and closely reviewed the transcript of the interview with Donald Trump Jr. And the real unanswered questions and the ones that should be revealed in public are in Donald Trump Jr.'s testimony. And there is no way that the testimony, if released from Glenn Simpson, would taint or influence or in any way distract from the testimony of others before this committee. And I think the American public needs to know what all of this testimony is. They have a right to know it. And the real distraction here, in my view, is the focus on Fusion GPS in the way that Republicans are using it, because it's part of an effort to distract us from the real focus, collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians in their meddling, as well as obstruction of justice, and possibly also legislation that must be passed to protect the special counsel. You've made reference already tonight to a number of very concerning developments. The appointment of a new U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, who was personally interviewed by the president, as well as that meeting between Paul Ryan and Christopher Wray, the head of the FBI, and Rod Rosenstein. All of it smacks of potential efforts to stop or stymie or discredit the special counsel investigation.
On that last point, briefly, Senator, do you know anything about this meeting between Rod Rosenstein and Christopher Wray and Paul Ryan? It was a surprise to observers. I don't think anybody had advance word that this was happening. I'm not sure anybody knows what it was about. We are told that the meeting was to discuss Congressman Devin Nunes, who's been the very controversial chair of the Intelligence Committee, as well as being a Trump transition team member. Do you know anything about that meeting or what it was about?
I know nothing about it. My hope is that it was not to hand over evidence or summaries of evidence or indications of what is going to happen in the special counsel investigation, because that would be improper.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, member of the Senate Committee on the Judiciary. Really appreciate your time tonight, sir. Thank you for being with us. Busy night, I know.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't want to let this get lost in the sauce here, just underscoring what Senator Blumenthal just said there. Having reviewed the transcripts of the Donald Trump Jr. testimony, which was behind closed doors and hasn't been released, and the Glenn Simpson Fusion GPS testimony, which is behind closed doors and hasn't been released, Senator Blumenthal said, having seen both of those transcripts, he says there's nothing about this Fusion GPS Glenn Simpson transcript which would taint anything from any other witness and interfere with the investigation, and he is calling for that Donald Trump Jr. transcript to be released, saying that it's important. My interest is piqued. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back.